Emma Grace Mitchell sat alone on the cold tile floor of her school's bathroom, her small frame trembling as silent tears rolled down her cheeks. Another day. Another painful, exhausting day of being different, of struggling to communicate with a world that seemed designed for people who could speak fluently. At 8 years old, she had already experienced more rejection and misunderstanding than most people encounter in a lifetime. Her severe speech impediment, a stutter combined with auditory processing difficulty, made even the simplest conversations feel like climbing an impossible mountain. The girl had spent the entire morning in Mrs. Henderson's third-grade classroom, watching her classmates raise their hands confidently, answer questions without hesitation, and laugh together during group discussions. Emma understood everything the teacher said. Her mind worked perfectly fine. Her intelligence was never the problem. The problem was that when she opened her mouth to speak, the words stumbled over themselves, tripping and falling before they could reach her lips. By the time a sentence emerged, it was fractured, incomplete, and often incomprehensible to her listeners. During show and tell earlier that morning, Emma had tried desperately to present her favorite book to the class. She had practiced for an entire week, rehearsing every word in front of her bathroom mirror, determined to finally share something of herself with her classmates. But when she stood before 30 pairs of eyes, her throat closed up. The words became tangled, her voice shook, and within 30 seconds the other children began to giggle. Not out of malice exactly, but out of discomfort with something they didn't understand. Mrs. Henderson had gently suggested Emma sit down, and that simple gesture of compassion somehow felt worse than outright mockery. By lunchtime, Emma had retreated to her usual spot in the library corner, eating her sandwich in complete silence while the other children played tag in the gymnasium. At home, the situation wasn't much different. Emma's younger brother, just 5 years old, seemed to navigate social situations with effortless grace. He chatted constantly, made friends instantly, and possessed a natural charm that Emma desperately. Her parents loved her deeply. This she never doubted, but she could see the worry etched into the lines of their faces, the concerned glances they exchanged when she refused to participate in family dinners or recite the required presentation for school. They had taken her to speech therapists, educational psychologists, and specialized tutors. While these professionals were kind and the sessions sometimes helped, nothing seemed to break through the invisible barrier that separated Emma from the rest of the world. Emma's mother, Susan, had spent countless evenings researching solutions, filling notebooks with potential interventions and therapeutic approaches. Her father, David, often sat quietly beside Emma's bed at night, simply being present, offering silent support. But even their unconditional love couldn't erase the fundamental loneliness that consumed her. Emma felt trapped inside her own body, capable of thinking and feeling and understanding everything around her, yet unable to express any of it effectively. The frustration was suffocating, like being locked in a glass room where everyone could see her but no one could truly hear her. Everything changed on a Saturday morning in March, exactly 3 weeks after the devastating show-and-tell incident. Emma's parents had planned something special. They drove to a local animal rescue center, a place Emma had never visited before. Her mother explained, with careful pronunciation and encouraging gestures, that they were going to look at dogs available for adoption. Emma had never had a pet before. The family had always been too busy, too focused on therapeutic interventions, too cautious about adding complexity to their lives. But something had shifted in her parents' perspective. Perhaps, they reasoned, a companion animal might provide Emma with a source of unconditional acceptance and non-judgmental companionship. The rescue center smelled of dog food, fresh hay, and something else Emma couldn't quite identify. The shelter volunteer, an elderly woman with silver hair and kind eyes, walked them through rows of kennels. Most of the dogs barked excitedly, jumping against their gates, desperate for attention and possible adoption. Emma watched them all, remaining silent as usual, her small hand held tightly in her mother's grip. Then, as they approached the last row, she saw him. Max was a 3-year-old golden retriever with a coat the color of honey warmed by sunlight. Unlike the other dogs, he didn't bark or jump. He simply sat quietly in his kennel, his deep brown eyes watching Emma with an intelligence and gentleness that seemed almost supernatural. The volunteer explained that Max had been surrendered by his previous family due to their relocation overseas. He was a gentle soul, perfectly trained, and surprisingly intuitive for a dog. As Emma stepped closer to his kennel, something extraordinary happened. Max stood slowly and approached the gate, his movement graceful and deliberate. Without any prompting, he pressed his nose gently against the metal fence, exactly at Emma's eye level. She reached out her small hand, and Max nuzzled it softly, his warm breath creating small clouds of mist against her cool skin. In that single moment, an invisible thread connected them. It was as though Max could sense her pain, her isolation, her desperate need to be understood. His eyes held no judgment, no impatience, no expectation. He simply looked at her with complete, unconditional acceptance. Emma's parents watched in astonishment as their daughter's entire demeanor transformed. Her shoulders relaxed, her breathing deepened. For the first time in months, a genuine smile appeared on her face, not forced, not practiced, but authentic and radiant. She didn't attempt to speak. She didn't need to. Max seemed to understand everything her body language communicated: loneliness, hope, a desperate desire for connection. The adoption process was completed within the hour. As they drove home with Max secured safely in the back seat, Emma sat beside him, her hand resting on his warm fur. Max didn't demand conversation. He didn't expect Emma to perform or prove her worth through spoken words. He simply existed beside her, his presence itself a form of profound communication. Emma realized that, for the first time in her life, she had found someone, or rather, someone had found her, who understood her completely without requiring a single word. That evening, as Emma lay in bed with Max sleeping peacefully on the rug beside her, she understood something fundamental about connection and communication. Words were just one language among infinite possibilities, and with Max, she had finally found someone fluent in hers. The first week with Max was transformative in ways Emma's parents could never have anticipated. The golden retriever settled into their home as though he had always belonged there, his calm presence creating an atmosphere of peace that seemed to absorb the family's collective anxiety. But for Emma, Max represented something far more significant than a pleasant household addition. He was her first genuine friend, her translator into a world that had previously felt hostile and rejecting. Emma spent every available moment with Max, and the dog reciprocated her attention with unwavering devotion. Unlike humans, Max never seemed frustrated by Emma's inability to speak fluently. He never exchanged concerned glances with others or offered the sympathetic looks that made Emma feel like a problem requiring solving. Instead, Max watched her with complete presence, his entire being focused entirely on understanding what she was trying to communicate. This unconditional attention was intoxicating to a child who had spent years feeling invisible and misunderstood. During those early days, Emma began to notice something remarkable about Max's behavior. He seemed to anticipate her needs and emotions before she expressed them. On mornings when Emma woke anxious about school, Max would position himself directly against her body, his weight a grounding presence that seemed to calm her racing thoughts. When she returned home from difficult days at school, defeated and withdrawn, Max would bring her his favorite toy and place it gently in her lap, as if offering comfort through a gift. He was responding to subtle cues in her body language, her breathing patterns, even the tone of her limited vocalizations. Emma began experimenting with this responsiveness. She realized that Max reacted differently to her various sounds and gestures. When she made a soft clicking sound with her tongue, Max's ears perked up with interest. When she made a higher-pitched humming noise, he would come immediately to sit beside her. These weren't trained behaviors. They were spontaneous discoveries that emerged from their constant interaction and Emma's meticulous observation of his responses. One afternoon in early April, Emma was sitting in the backyard watching Max play with a tennis ball. She was attempting to practice her speech exercises, words the speech therapist had assigned her to repeat daily. The exercises were tedious and often made her feel more acutely aware of her limitations. Today, she simply couldn't bear to continue. Instead, she began experimenting with different sounds and gestures, almost unconsciously. She made a soft, repetitive tapping sound on her leg, and Max immediately abandoned his tennis ball, trotting over to her with what could only be described as concern. Emma realized that the tapping had communicated something to him, perhaps a signal that she needed comfort or companionship. She tried it again, this time intentionally, and Max responded identically, pressing his body against her legs and looking up at her face with those intelligent brown eyes. Something clicked in Emma's mind. Max wasn't simply reacting randomly to sounds. He was engaging in genuine communication, interpreting her signals and responding thoughtfully. Over the following weeks, Emma and Max developed an increasingly sophisticated system of signals. She discovered that when she made a specific hand gesture, a circular motion in the air, Max would understand that playtime was coming. He would bounce excitedly, his entire body vibrating with anticipation. When she made a different gesture, a gentle downward motion of her palm, Max would immediately settle into a calm, submissive posture, understanding that she needed quiet companionship. She learned that a soft whistle signaled outdoor time, while a series of clicking sounds meant mealtime. But Emma wanted more. She wanted to create something truly unique, something that belonged entirely to them, something that demonstrated the depth of their connection to anyone who witnessed it. Over countless practice sessions in their backyard, she began teaching Max more complex sequences of commands, not through traditional training methods, but through patience, repetition, and genuine affection. The process was painstaking and beautiful. Emma would repeat a gesture hundreds of times, rewarding Max with treats and praise, verbal praise that came out garbled and difficult, but which Max seemed to understand perfectly through her tone and the genuine joy in her voice. She taught him to spin in circles by making a rapid rotating gesture with her finger. She taught him to leap by making an upward sweeping motion with her arm. She taught him to bow by pressing her palm gently downward. Each movement took weeks to perfect, but Emma never rushed the process. She had learned from her own experience that forcing communication never worked. Only patience and love could create genuine understanding. By May, Emma had developed an intricate dance with Max, a choreographed sequence of movements that only they understood. But she wanted one special signal, something that would encapsulate everything their bond represented, something that would be unmistakably theirs alone. She spent an entire week designing this signal, visualizing it in her mind, practicing it alone in her room while Max watched with patient curiosity. The final signal emerged from her heart, a soft whistle, the first sound Max had ever responded to from her, combined with a flowing circular hand motion that represented the endless cycle of their connection, and finishing with a snap of her fingers, a sharp sound that brought everything together in a moment of complete understanding. When Emma performed this complete sequence for the first time, Max responded with a performance that brought tears to her eyes. He spun 3 times with perfect precision, his movements fluid and graceful. Then he leaped through an invisible hurdle with remarkable height, his body suspended momentarily in midair. He landed gracefully and performed a respectful bow, lowering his front legs while keeping his rear elevated. Finally, he approached Emma and rested his head gently on her shoulder, staying there in perfect stillness. That moment changed everything. Emma realized that she and Max had created something beyond simple training or behavioral conditioning. They had developed a genuine language, as complex and meaningful as any spoken words. This signal represented their entire relationship. The whistle was their first meeting. The circular motion was their endless bond. The spin represented Emma's joy. The leap symbolized their breakthrough moments. The bow acknowledged mutual respect, and the final head-on-shoulder gesture communicated unconditional love and perfect understanding. Emma called it the secret signal, and she understood that it was sacred. This wasn't a trick to perform for audiences. This was the essence of her and Max's connection, a private language that belonged only to them, a testament to the fact that communication transcended spoken words entirely. As Emma practiced the signal repeatedly over the following weeks, she felt her confidence growing. If she could communicate this effectively with Max, perhaps other forms of connection were possible too. Perhaps she wasn't fundamentally broken or impossible to understand. Perhaps, with the right person or dog, she could be heard. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen window as Susan Mitchell sorted through the pile of mail that had accumulated on the counter over the past week. Bills, advertisements, and the usual household correspondence formed neat stacks as she methodically organized each piece. Emma sat at the breakfast table, cereal growing soggy in her bowl as she absent-mindedly watched Max eat from his food bowl in the corner, the dog's rhythmic crunching creating a soothing background sound. It was a perfectly ordinary Saturday morning in late May, the kind of day that seemed unremarkable until a single moment altered everything. Susan pulled out a glossy flyer from an envelope, her eyes scanning the colorful printed text. Her eyebrows rose slightly as she continued reading, and Emma noticed her mother's expression shifting from casual curiosity to something more intentional. Susan read the entire flyer twice, her lips moving silently as she absorbed each detail. Then slowly, she turned to face her daughter. "Emma, sweetie," Susan said carefully, using the clear, deliberate speech pattern she had developed specifically for her daughter's benefit, "I want to show you something. Come here, please." Emma approached her mother cautiously, her typical wariness around new situations evident in her careful movements. Susan held out the flyer, her finger pointing to bold letters at the top, National Youth and Pet Talent Competition. Beneath the title, vibrant images showed children of various ages performing alongside dogs, cats, birds, and other animals. Young performers were captured mid-action, some executing complex tricks with their pets, others displaying remarkable bonds through coordinated routines. "This competition is happening in 3 months," Susan explained, her voice carrying an unusual excitement. "Young people from across the country compete with their animal companions. They showcase talents, tricks, and connections." She paused deliberately before using that final word, understanding its particular significance. "Emma, I think you and Max might have something special to show the world." Emma's heart began racing. Her initial instinct was fear, immediate, visceral, overwhelming fear. She felt her chest tighten and her palms grow clammy. Competition meant judges. Judges meant judgment. Public performance meant hundreds of eyes watching her struggle to communicate. The anxiety threatened to consume her entirely, and she felt the familiar urge to retreat, to shake her head emphatically, to reject this opportunity before it could reject her. But then Max appeared, pressing his warm body against Emma's legs as though sensing her distress. The dog looked up at her with those patient, understanding eyes, and something shifted inside her. She thought about their secret signal, the beautiful language they had created together. She thought about how effortlessly Max understood her, how he never demanded she be different, how their communication transcended words entirely. What if other people could understand this? What if the world could witness what Max already knew, that she was capable of creating something meaningful and beautiful? Emma's hands trembled as she took the flyer from her mother. She studied the images again, this time with different eyes. She imagined herself and Max on that stage, performing their secret signal. She imagined the judges' expressions as they witnessed something genuine and authentic. Her fear didn't disappear entirely, but it became companioned by something else, a fragile but persistent hope. That evening, when her father returned home from work, Susan presented the competition flyer to him. David Mitchell's reaction was more hesitant than his wife's. He loved his daughter fiercely, and that fierce love came wrapped in protective worry. "I'm not sure this is the right environment for Emma," he said thoughtfully, reading the competition details with furrowed brows. There will be significant pressure, crowds, potential for disappointment. Susan understood her husband's concerns. She shared them, honestly. But she had seen something in Emma's face when she first read about the competition, a spark of possibility that had been absent for too long. What if we're protecting her from disappointment by preventing her from ever trying? Susan asked gently. What if the real disappointment comes from never taking chances? David was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked at his daughter, who had been listening to their conversation with intense focus. What do you think, Emma? Do you want to do this? He asked. Emma's response came not in words but in action. She walked to Max and performed their secret signal with perfect execution. Max responded flawlessly, spinning, leaping, bowing, and resting his head on her shoulder. In that moment, David understood what his wife had intuited. Emma possessed something extraordinary, not just a trained dog, but a profound connection that transcended conventional communication. And Emma deserved the opportunity to share that with the world. Then we'll support you completely, David said, and Emma felt tears of relief and gratitude streaming down her face. The following weeks became a dedicated journey of preparation. Emma practiced the secret signal daily, sometimes multiple times per day, refining every gesture and ensuring Max's responses remained flawless. She worked with Max in various settings, the backyard, the living room, even in the park, to ensure that environmental changes wouldn't disrupt their performance. Her parents enrolled her in a specialized confidence-building program designed for children with communication challenges, focusing on managing performance anxiety and building self-assurance. But perhaps most importantly, Emma began to see the competition not as something to be feared, but as an opportunity to share something she believed in deeply. She created a small journal where she drew pictures of her and Max, documenting their journey together. She wrote out the story of how Max had changed her life, with her parents' help transcribing her halting speech into coherent sentences. She read this story aloud to Max each evening, her speech still imperfect but her determination increasingly solid. Her school provided support as well. Mrs. Henderson, her third-grade teacher, had been deeply affected by the transformation she witnessed in Emma over recent months. The quiet, withdrawn girl who had retreated during show-and-tell now carried herself with subtle but noticeable confidence. Mrs. Henderson encouraged Emma in every way possible, even arranging for Emma to practice her performance in front of her entire class in a supportive, non-judgmental environment. As August approached and the competition drew closer, Emma experienced something unexpected. She found herself genuinely excited rather than primarily anxious. Yes, the anxiety remained, the fear of judgment, the worry about performing under pressure, but these feelings were now balanced by anticipation and purpose. She and Max had something worth sharing. Their bond was genuine and beautiful. The judges would either understand this or they wouldn't. But either way, Emma knew that she and Max had already accomplished something magnificent simply by creating their secret signal together. The night before they were scheduled to leave for the competition, held several hours away in a large metropolitan center, Emma lay in bed with Max sleeping beside her. She performed their secret signal one final time in the darkness, and Max responded with perfect precision even without proper lighting. Emma rested her head against Max's warm body and whispered, "Tomorrow, we show them who we are." Max's tail wagged gently, as if to say, "I've always known exactly who you are." The grand convention center loomed before them like a monument to Emma's worst fears. The enormous building stretched across an entire city block, its glass and steel architecture reflecting the overcast sky above. Dark clouds gathered overhead, and Emma wondered if the weather was somehow mirroring her internal state, turbulent, uncertain, threatening to storm at any moment. Her parents sat in the front seat of their car, parked in the competitors' section of the parking lot, but none of them made any move to exit the vehicle. "We don't have to do this," her father said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of genuine concern. "We can turn around right now. No one would judge you for changing your mind. Emma understood what her father was offering, an escape route, a way out of the vulnerability she was about to expose herself to. Part of her desperately wanted to accept that offer, but another part of her, the part that had grown stronger over these past months alongside Max, knew that running away would only confirm every doubt she had ever harbored about herself. She shook her head firmly and opened the car door. The backstage area of the convention center was chaos dressed in organized structure. Emma, her parents, and Max were directed through a series of corridors by volunteers wearing official competition t-shirts and clipboards. The hallways were lined with other competitors and their animals, each group preparing in their own way. Emma's senses were immediately overwhelmed. To her left, a teenage girl worked with a border collie on an elaborate obstacle course, the dog weaving through poles and jumping over hurdles with mechanical precision. The trainer's movements were sharp and efficient, every gesture calculated and perfected. To her right, a boy perhaps 12 years old practiced with a parrot, teaching the bird to step from one perch to another while reciting commands clearly and confidently. Further down the corridor, Emma spotted a girl with twin rabbits, running them through an intricate maze while speaking to her parents about their rehearsal strategy. Emma felt her confidence beginning to crack, fractures spreading like ice across her carefully constructed belief in what she and Max had created. These weren't amateur performances. These were polished, professional-level acts. Most of these competitors had clearly worked with professional animal trainers. Their animals executed complex sequences with robotic precision. Their presentations were slick and impressive and utterly unlike anything Emma and Max had prepared. Her parents must have sensed her growing panic because her mother placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Remember, Emma, everyone here is nervous. They're all feeling what you're feeling right now," Susan whispered. But Emma wasn't certain that was true. These competitors looked confident, assured, like they belonged here. They looked like people whose nervous systems weren't constantly betraying them, like people whose bodies cooperated with their desires, like people whose mouths could form words without stuttering and struggling. Emma felt the now familiar sensation of inadequacy washing over her, threatening to pull her under. The volunteer directed their family to a designated waiting area marked Competitors 4752. Emma was number 49. She calculated quickly. That meant she would perform sometime during the third hour of competition. Hours of waiting, hours to spiral into her own doubts. The waiting area was a large room with folding chairs arranged in rows facing a television screen that displayed a live feed from the main stage. Emma watched as the first competitors began to perform. A woman with an impressive German Shepherd executed a military-style obedience routine, the dog responding to vocal commands with absolute precision. The audience applauded enthusiastically. The judges made notes on their scorecards, their expressions unreadable. As each act concluded, Emma felt her anxiety escalating. A man performed with 3 trained parrots that flew in synchronized patterns. A teenage girl showcased her horse's dressage abilities, a breathtaking display of coordination and training. A young boy performed with a trained pig that navigated an obstacle course faster than seemed physically possible. Each performance was impressive, each competitor clearly experienced and confident. Emma's hands began to shake. She clasped them together tightly, trying to prevent her parents from noticing. But Max noticed. The dog pressed his body firmly against her legs, his weight a grounding presence that seemed to anchor her to reality. Emma looked down at her faithful companion, and Max gazed back at her with those unchanging, patient eyes. He didn't care about the other competitors. He didn't seem impressed or intimidated by their polished performances. He simply looked at Emma with complete acceptance and unwavering faith. "What if our signal isn't impressive enough?" Emma whispered to Max, the words coming out distorted and halting, but her meaning conveyed through tone and body language. "What if the judges think it's too simple? What if they think I just got lucky with a well-trained dog?" Max responded by shifting his weight, placing his head directly on Emma's lap. It was a gesture of comfort, but also something more. It was as though Max was saying, "You're not thinking about this correctly. This was never about being impressive. This was always about being true." Emma's mother pulled out the small journal Emma had created during her preparation, the one where she had documented her journey with Max through drawings and written words. "Read this," Susan suggested gently. "Remember why you're here." Emma opened the journal to a page she had created weeks ago. There was a drawing of herself looking sad and isolated, surrounded by question marks. Below that drawing was an image of Max, his eyes gentle and understanding. And beneath both drawings, Emma had written in her careful, slightly crooked handwriting, "Max understood me when nobody else could. Max speaks my language." As Emma read those words again, something shifted inside her. She wasn't here to compete against these other performers. She wasn't here to prove she could train an animal like professional trainers did. She was here to share something authentic, a genuine connection between a girl and a dog that transcended traditional communication. If the judges didn't understand that, it would be their loss, not hers. But the anxiety didn't disappear entirely. That would have been too simple, too unrealistic. Instead, it transformed. The fear remained, but it became companioned by resolve. Emma's hands continued to tremble slightly, and her chest felt tight, but these physical manifestations now represented not just fear but also anticipation. As competitor 48 took the stage to perform with a trained cat, Emma stood up and began doing gentle stretches with Max. She performed their secret signal slowly, deliberately, grounding herself in the familiarity of their connection. Max responded flawlessly, and with each movement, Emma felt her center stabilizing. When the volunteer called Competitor 49, "You're up," Emma felt her stomach plunge. But she took a deep breath, gripped Max's collar, and walked toward the stage entrance. Her parents watched with expressions mixing pride and protective concern. Behind her, the other waiting competitors seemed to fade into irrelevance. As Emma approached the stage, she whispered one final message to Max. "Let's show them who we are." Stage lights were blindingly bright, far more intense than Emma had anticipated. She walked out onto the polished wooden platform with Max, and the illumination hit her like a physical force, washing away the comfortable darkness of the backstage area. The audience came into focus gradually as her eyes adjusted. Hundreds of people sitting in neat rows, their faces turned toward her with expressions ranging from curious to skeptical to bored. Some people were still settling into their seats, whispering conversations continuing even as Emma positioned herself at center stage. Emma's vision narrowed, as though the world around her was becoming increasingly distant. This was a symptom of her anxiety, tunnel vision that sometimes accompanied her panic responses. She could see the judges' table clearly, though. 3 people sat behind a long desk, pens poised over scorecards, their expressions professionally neutral. In the middle sat a woman who appeared to be in her 60s, with sharp eyes and a composed demeanor. To her left was a younger man, perhaps in his 40s, with kind features but an evaluative gaze. To her right was another woman with graying hair pulled back in a severe bun. Emma's hands felt numb and distant, as though they belonged to someone else's body. Her mouth had gone completely dry, her throat tight as a closed fist. She was acutely aware of the microphone positioned near the stage, aware that she had been scheduled to introduce herself and Max, and aware that she absolutely could not speak coherently enough to manage that introduction. The speech therapist had suggested she could give a brief verbal introduction, assuring Emma that the judges would be understanding. But standing here now, under these lights with all these eyes upon her, Emma knew that her voice would betray her, that her words would come out mangled and difficult. Max sensed her distress immediately. The dog's body tensed, and he looked up at her with genuine concern. Emma realized she was gripping his collar too tightly, her fingers digging in slightly more than intended. She forced herself to relax, to breathe, to remember why she was here. Her eyes found her parents in the audience. They sat in the front row, her mother's hand gripping her father's arm, both of them leaning forward with expressions of supportive concern. Emma decided to skip the verbal introduction. Instead, she simply pointed to a placard that had been provided, where a volunteer had written, "Emma Mitchell and Max, the secret signal." The audience settled somewhat, several people ceasing their conversations and giving the stage their full attention. Emma took position at center stage, ensuring she had adequate space for Max to perform. She ran through the sequence in her mind one final time: whistle, circular motion, snap, spin, leap, bow, head on shoulder. She had performed this signal hundreds of times, thousands perhaps. She and Max had drilled it until it became second nature, until the movements flowed from instinct rather than conscious thought. But this was different. This was the moment everything hinged upon. Emma took a deep breath and performed the signal. The soft whistle emerged from her lips, not perfectly confident but clear enough. Her hand began the circular motion, smooth and deliberate. Her fingers snapped. Nothing happened. Max remained standing exactly where he was, his body completely still. His eyes were fixed on Emma, and she could see uncertainty in his gaze. Had he not heard the whistle clearly? Was the acoustics of the large auditorium confusing him? Had the stress and strange environment disrupted their connection? Emma's heart began to race even faster. Seconds stretched like taffy, extending and expanding in her perception. The audience grew quieter, sensing something unusual. Some people began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. Emma felt panic rising in her chest like floodwater. This was going to be a disaster. She had failed. They had failed. All those hours of preparation, all that hope, all that vulnerability, and it was going to end in public humiliation. She could feel the judges' disappointment before they even finished taking notes. She could imagine the sympathetic comments that would follow. Such a sweet girl, but her dog just isn't trained well enough. Emma closed her eyes for just a moment, and in that moment she felt Max's presence beside her, steady and unchanging. She remembered what Max had communicated when she doubted herself backstage. "You're not thinking about this correctly." This was never about being impressive. This was always about being true. Emma opened her eyes and looked directly at Max. Not as a trainer commanding her dog, but as a friend speaking to a friend. And in that moment of genuine connection, unmediated by performance anxiety or external judgment, something shifted. Max exploded into motion. He spun 3 times with such graceful precision that the movement seemed almost choreographed by a professional dancer. His body rotated smoothly, his legs perfectly coordinated, his momentum expertly controlled. The audience gasped audibly. Then, with power that seemed impossible from a 75-pound dog, Max leaped through the invisible hurdle, his body suspended momentarily in midair, his form arcing with beautiful athleticism. He landed with perfect balance and immediately transitioned into a respectful bow, his front legs extending forward while his rear end remained elevated. His head lowered in a gesture that could only be interpreted as respectful acknowledgement. But it was the final movement that broke through every barrier in the auditorium. Max approached Emma slowly and deliberately, his movements deliberate and filled with intention. He pressed his head gently against her shoulder and remained there in perfect stillness, his body weight slightly supported by her frame. It was an embrace, a statement of unconditional love. A declaration that transcended language entirely. The audience erupted. The applause began hesitantly, then built into a thunderous ovation. People stood up from their seats, their hands coming together in enthusiastic recognition of what they had just witnessed. Emma felt tears streaming down her face, tears of relief, gratitude, disbelief, and overwhelming emotion. Max remained with his head on her shoulder, and she could feel his tail wagging slowly against her leg. The judges were visibly affected. The woman in the middle had set down her pen and was watching Emma and Max with an expression of profound emotion. She was leaning forward, her professional composure cracking to reveal genuine wonder. The man to her left was nodding slowly, his earlier skepticism completely transformed. The woman on the right had her hand pressed to her chest, as though physically holding back tears. As the applause continued and continued, Emma realized something fundamental. They had succeeded. Not because they had impressed anyone or won any competition, but because they had communicated something true and authentic. In that moment when Max seemed not to respond, in the apparent failure, Max had actually taught Emma the most important lesson, that real connection transcends performance and expectation. And somehow, that had made their signal more powerful, not less. Emma buried her face in Max's golden fur and allowed herself to cry, not tears of sadness, but tears of overwhelming release and joy. Doctor sat motionless as the auditorium erupted in applause. Her professional composure, carefully maintained throughout the morning's performances, had completely dissolved. Her hands rested on the scoring table in front of her, trembling slightly as tears filled her eyes. For the first time in 30 years of judging animal behavior competitions, of studying human-animal interactions academically, of observing countless trained animals perform choreographed routines, she had witnessed something that transcended mere training or behavioral conditioning. She watched Emma standing center stage, her small frame wrapped around Max's neck, the girl's shoulders shaking with emotional release. In that image, Doctor saw something she had spent her entire professional career searching for, a genuine, unfiltered, authentic connection between human and animal that couldn't be manufactured or trained or coached into existence. This wasn't a girl displaying a well-trained dog. This was a girl and her dog communicating in a language that belonged entirely to them. The applause continued unabated. People throughout the auditorium remained on their feet, their hands coming together in spontaneous, enthusiastic recognition. But Doctor was no longer watching the audience reaction. She was watching Emma. She observed how the girl's entire posture had changed from the beginning of the performance to now. The initial tension and fear that had been visible in Emma's shoulders had transformed into something else, a kind of grounded presence, a peace that came from sharing something vulnerable and authentic. Doctor stood up from her seat at the judges' table. The other two judges looked at her with surprise. Rising during a performance was unconventional, disruptive to protocol. Judge, the man to her left, began to reach out as if to gently pull her back down, but something in Doctor's expression stopped him. She was moving with purpose, with intention, with a kind of quiet determination that indicated this was necessary. Doctor walked slowly down from the judge's platform and approached the stage. The audience's applause began to diminish as people noticed the unusual movement, sensing that something significant was occurring. Cameras that had been casually pointed at the stage suddenly became more focused. The other two judges exchanged glances of uncertainty. Emma noticed the judge approaching and her body immediately tensed. She had never seen a judge leave the table during a performance. Was this a negative sign? Was Doctor coming to stop them, to indicate that something had gone wrong? Max sensed Emma's renewed anxiety and pressed more firmly against her leg, offering grounding support. Doctor climbed the stairs to the stage slowly, her eyes never leaving Emma's face. When she reached center stage, she did something completely unexpected. She knelt down. An elderly woman in a professional competition setting, kneeling on the polished floor, bringing herself to eye level with the 8-year-old girl who stood trembling before her. "Hello, Emma," Doctor said softly, her voice warm but carrying weight. "My name is Doctor. I'm one of the judges today." She paused, her eyes studying the girl's face with genuine curiosity and compassion. "I need to ask you something very important, and I want you to answer me honestly. Can you do that?" Emma nodded, her throat too tight to attempt verbal communication. "How did you teach Max those movements?" Doctor asked. "Did you work with a professional trainer? Did you follow specific training protocols?" Emma shook her head slowly. She pointed to herself, then to Max, then made the gesture that represented their secret signal, the circular motion of her hand. She was trying to communicate that she and Max had created this together, that it came from their connection, not from external training. Doctor studied the girl's face, and understanding seemed to dawn across her features. She reached out and gently took Emma's hand, her touch communicating care and validation. Then she stood slowly and turned to face the audience, still holding Emma's small hand within her own. "I need to speak," Doctor said, her voice clear and carrying through the auditorium sound system. "In my 30 years of studying animal behavior, in my career spent observing thousands of trained animals perform countless routines, I have never witnessed what I just saw." The auditorium had gone completely silent. People leaned forward in their seats, hanging on Doctor's every word. "What I observed here was not training in the traditional sense," Doctor continued, her voice trembling with emotion. "Throughout this competition today, I have seen remarkable animals performing impressive behaviors, but those performances, no matter how skillfully executed, were fundamentally about one being commanding another, a trainer instructing an animal, a human exercising control and dominion." Doctor paused, her gaze moving between Emma and Max. But this girl and this dog, they were not demonstrating a command-response relationship. They were demonstrating communication, genuine, bidirectional communication between two beings. When I watched Emma perform that signal, when I saw the moment of hesitation where Max seemed not to respond, I witnessed something profound. In that moment of apparent failure, what was actually happening was genuine communication breaking through the barriers of performance and expectation. Doctor knelt down again, her eyes level with Emma's. "Emma, your dog didn't respond to your signal because he was listening to your heart, not just your hands. He understood that you were afraid. And in that moment, Max made a choice. He chose to perform not because he was commanded to, but because he understood you needed him to. That's not training. That's love. That's a being choosing to support another being. That's the highest form of connection possible between human and animal." She stood again and addressed the entire audience. "This girl cannot speak as most of us speak, but she speaks fluently in a language I've spent my career trying to understand. She speaks the language of genuine connection, of patience, of unconditional acceptance. She has taught her dog, or perhaps her dog has taught her, that communication transcends words entirely, that understanding can happen in silence, that the most profound conversations are often the ones that never involve sound at all." Doctor's voice grew stronger, more passionate. "I've spent decades in academia, in research, in professional evaluation. I've published papers and established protocols and trained other professionals. But today, I'm confronted with the reality that the most important lessons cannot be taught in classrooms or learned from textbooks. They can only be understood through direct experience, through genuine connection, through the kind of authentic relationship I see between this girl and her dog." She turned back to Emma, her eyes filled with tears that she made no attempt to hide. "What you and Max have created together is extraordinary. It's not impressive because it's complicated. It's impressive because it's real. It's not remarkable because it's been trained to perfection. It's remarkable because it comes from love." Doctor extended her hand to Emma, and they stood together on the stage as the audience erupted again. But this time the applause was different. It carried recognition of something deeper than performance. It carried acknowledgement of authenticity, of vulnerability, of genuine human connection. Emma squeezed Doctor's hand, her entire body shaking with overwhelming emotion. Max pressed against both of them, completing a triangle of connection on that stage. In that moment, Emma understood that her journey with Max had significance beyond her wildest imagination. They had touched something universal, something that reminded everyone in that auditorium what it meant to truly understand another being. The judges' table had become the center of intense activity and discussion. Doctor had returned to her seat, but the conversation between the three judges was visibly animated. They were leaning toward each other, speaking in hushed but clearly passionate tones. Judge the man to the left kept shaking his head slowly, not in disagreement but in amazement. The third judge, the woman with the severe bun, was making extensive notes on her scorecard, her pen moving rapidly across the paper as though she were trying to capture something that might otherwise slip away. Emma and Max remained center stage, the girl's hand still gripping Max's collar as though he were an anchor keeping her tethered to reality. The audience had not fully resettled after Doctor's emotional speech. Whispers rippled through the rows of seats. People were talking to one another, gesturing toward Emma and Max, their expressions ranging from moved to amazed to skeptical. Some audience members were taking photographs or recording video on their phones. Emma felt exposed in a way that went far beyond simple performance anxiety. She felt seen, truly seen, in all her vulnerability. Her parents remained in the front row, her mother's face streaked with tears, her father's arm wrapped protectively around her shoulders. When Emma made eye contact with them, they both stood and applauded, their hands coming together with evident pride. This gesture seemed to give others permission to continue their appreciation, and the applause built again, though not quite reaching the thunderous level it had achieved moments before. A volunteer approached Emma from stage left, offering her a water bottle and suggesting she take a seat on a stool that had been provided at the edge of the stage. Emma accepted the water gratefully, her throat parched from the stress and emotional intensity of the performance. Max lay down beside the stool, his head resting on Emma's feet, his breathing steady and calm. The dog seemed completely unaffected by the drama surrounding them, his presence a quiet stability in the midst of chaos. 20 minutes passed. Other competitors had been scheduled after Emma, but the competition had paused. The audience remained seated, the energy in the auditorium different from before. There was anticipation in the air, a collective understanding that something significant was occurring, that the normal progression of the event had been interrupted by something that demanded special consideration. Finally, the lead judge from the judges' table, an older man with silver hair, whom Emma hadn't noticed particularly during the competition, approached a microphone that had been set up at the judges' platform. The auditorium quieted immediately. "Ladies and," the lead judge began, his voice carrying authority and formality, "we have a unique situation today. The judges have unanimously decided to pause the remainder of the competition to discuss and formally recognize the performance we have just witnessed." Emma felt her stomach drop. Pause the competition? Was this a disqualification? Had they done something wrong? The lead judge continued, "In the history of this competition, which has been running for 17 years, we have never encountered a performance that so profoundly challenged our understanding of what we're evaluating here today. After significant discussion, the three judges have reached a unanimous decision." He paused dramatically, and Emma held her breath. "We are awarding the grand prize and the special judge's commendation for most authentic human-animal bond to Emma Mitchell and Max." The auditorium erupted. This time, the applause was immediate and overwhelming. People jumped to their feet before the judge had even finished speaking. The ovation continued building, seeming to feed on itself, growing louder and more enthusiastic. Emma felt as though she was experiencing an out-of-body experience, as though this was happening to someone else, as though she was observing events from outside her own body. The lead judge was speaking again, his words almost inaudible beneath the continued applause. "Emma, your connection with Max represents the highest form of what human-animal partnerships can achieve. This prize recognizes not just the performance you delivered today, but the authentic, genuine bond that shines through every moment you spend together." Emma's parents rushed to the stage. Her mother reached her first, pulling her into a tight embrace, her body shaking with sobs of joy. Her father followed closely behind, his eyes bright with tears, his pride evident in every line of his face. Max's tail wagged furiously, and he jumped up to place his paws on both parents' shoulders, creating a group embrace of family and beloved pet. People throughout the audience were crying. Emma could see it even through her own tears, tissues being passed, hands wiping away tears, strangers embracing one another as though they had all participated in something transformative. The energy in the auditorium had shifted from competitive to communal, as though everyone present understood they had witnessed something larger than any individual performance. After the formal announcement concluded and the applause eventually subsided, the judges requested that Emma remain on stage for photographs and media interviews. This was standard protocol for competition winners, but Emma found the experience overwhelming. Cameras flashed repeatedly, creating spots of light that danced across her vision. Reporters shouted questions, though they adjusted their approach when they realized Emma couldn't verbally respond. Instead, they directed questions to her parents, who stood protectively nearby, translating Emma's responses through her gestures and body language. Then Doctor approached, having left the judge's table. She was holding a business card which she extended to Emma's mother. "I would very much like to discuss something with you all," Doctor said, her expression serious but warm. "What Emma and Max have accomplished here goes far beyond winning a competition. I believe their story has the potential to inspire and educate people on a much larger scale. I'd like to propose some opportunities, if your family is interested." Emma's mother took the business card with trembling hands. "What kind of opportunities?" she asked cautiously. "Speaking engagements at schools and therapeutic centers," Doctor explained. "Demonstrations for children facing communication challenges. Perhaps even a documentary or media project. Emma's journey with Max is powerful. It's the kind of story that can change perspectives and help people understand that difference isn't limitation. It's uniqueness." Emma's father placed his hand on his daughter's shoulder. "We'll need to discuss this as a family," he said carefully, "but we're very interested in hearing more details." That evening, as Emma lay in bed with Max sleeping beside her, she reflected on the extraordinary nature of everything that had happened. She had arrived at that competition terrified of judgment and failure. Instead, she had discovered that her greatest strength wasn't overcoming her communication challenge. It was creating an alternative form of communication so powerful and authentic that it resonated with an entire auditorium full of people. Max opened one eye and looked at her, his gaze filled with the same patient understanding it had always contained. Emma performed their secret signal softly, and Max responded with the complete sequence, even in the darkness of her bedroom. As his head came to rest on her shoulder in the final gesture, Emma whispered, "We did it, Max. We actually did it." What Emma didn't yet understand was that this was just the beginning. The competition victory was wonderful, but the true victory would come in the months and years ahead, as she and Max used their unique bond to touch the lives of countless other children facing their own struggles with communication, acceptance, and belonging. The stage they had stepped onto at the National Youth and Pet Talent Competition was merely the first stage of a much larger journey. 6 months after the competition, Emma sat in the gymnasium of Lincoln Elementary School, surrounded by 60 children ranging from 1st to 5th grade. The gymnasium had been transformed into an auditorium of sorts, with folding chairs arranged in semicircles facing a small stage area. Emma stood nervously at the side, her hand resting on Max's collar, watching the children file in with the enthusiastic chaos typical of school assemblies. Max remained perfectly calm, his breathing steady and rhythmic, seemingly unbothered by the attention and anticipation surrounding them. This was Emma's 7th demonstration since the competition ended. Doctor had been instrumental in coordinating these opportunities, leveraging her professional connections and the growing media attention surrounding Emma and Max's story. What had started as a single local news feature had evolved into regional television coverage, then national attention. Emma's story, the quiet girl who couldn't speak but who had created an extraordinary language with her dog, had resonated with audiences across the country in ways that seemed almost inexplicable. The gymnasium doors closed and a teacher approached the microphone. "Children, we have a very special guest today. Emma Mitchell is an 8-year-old girl who has discovered something remarkable about communication and friendship. She's going to share her story with us, along with her best friend Max. Emma took a deep breath and walked onto the small stage, Max moving gracefully beside her. Unlike the competition, where she had felt exposed and vulnerable, these school demonstrations felt different. Here, surrounded by children who often struggled with their own forms of difference and difficulty, Emma felt a sense of purpose and belonging. She began by performing their secret signal, the soft whistle, the circular hand motion, the snap of her fingers. Max responded with perfect precision, spinning and leaping and bowing before resting his head on Emma's shoulder. The children erupted in delighted applause, but Emma didn't stop there. She had developed a way of communicating her story to audiences, using a combination of demonstration, visual aids, and written words that were read aloud by a narrator, sometimes her mother, sometimes Doctor, and increasingly, Emma herself, her speech becoming more confident with each passing month. Through the demonstration, the children learned about Emma's journey, her initial isolation, her meeting with Max, the development of their secret signal. Emma showed them drawings she had made, depicting key moments in her relationship with her dog. She demonstrated different signals and how Max responded to each one. But most importantly, she communicated a message that seemed to touch something deep within every child present. That being different wasn't something to be ashamed of. That communication took many forms, and that genuine connection transcended conventional language. After the demonstration, children approached Emma shyly, eager to pet Max and interact with the girl who had captured their imagination. Emma noticed a particular boy, perhaps 10 years old, lingering at the edge of the crowd. He had a noticeable stutter, his words coming out in fits and starts as he tried to speak to his classmates. When their eyes met, Emma smiled and gestured for him to come closer. The boy approached hesitantly, and Emma handed him a drawing she had made during her preparation, a picture of herself and Max, with the words "different is special" written beneath in her careful handwriting. The boy's eyes filled with tears as he looked at the drawing. He couldn't articulate what the gift meant to him. His stutter made even simple expression difficult, but Emma understood anyway. She placed her hand on his shoulder and performed the secret signal slowly, and as Max responded, the boy watched with an expression of wonder. In that moment, Emma understood the true significance of her mission. She wasn't just entertaining audiences or sharing a heartwarming story. She was providing hope to children who desperately needed to know that their struggles didn't define their value or their potential for connection. Over the following months, Emma and Max visited hospitals, therapeutic centers, schools for children with special needs, and community centers across multiple states. In each location, Emma's story created ripples of impact that extended far beyond the immediate audience. Children facing speech impediments found courage in Emma's example. Families with disabled children discovered new perspectives on adaptation and resilience. Teachers and therapists incorporated Emma's story into their work, using it as a tool to help children understand that difference and limitation were not the same thing. Emma's own development during this time was remarkable. Working with a speech therapist who had studied Emma's unique situation, she began to make significant progress in her verbal communication. The therapeutic work was complemented by her increasing confidence. Each demonstration, each child she helped, each person whose perspective she shifted, built her self-assurance. By the end of her 4th grade year, Emma could speak in complete sentences without significant stuttering, though her speech remained slightly different from typical children her age. She no longer saw this difference as a limitation. It was simply part of who she was. Doctor had begun working on a documentary about Emma and Max's journey, interviewing not just Emma and her family, but also the children and families they had helped during their demonstrations. The documentary was scheduled for release the following year, and early screenings at film festivals had generated significant buzz. People were drawn to the authenticity of Emma's story, the genuine nature of her bond with Max, and the profound message that communication, true, authentic communication, went far deeper than words. One evening, as Emma sat on her bed with Max beside her, she reflected on the extraordinary changes in her life. She thought about the girl she had been just 2 years ago, isolated, afraid, convinced that her inability to speak fluently meant she had nothing valuable to offer the world. She thought about meeting Max, about developing their secret signal, about standing on that stage at the competition with her heart pounding and her confidence crumbling. Max pressed his head against her shoulder, and Emma performed their secret signal one final time before bed. It had become a ritual, a way of honoring their connection at the end of each day. As Max completed the sequence, coming to rest with his head on her shoulder, Emma whispered words that would have been unimaginable for her to say 2 years earlier. "I love you, Max. Thank you for teaching me who I am." Years later, when Emma was asked in interviews about her greatest accomplishment, she would always pause before answering. "People think it was winning the competition or the demonstrations or the documentary," she would say thoughtfully. "But the real accomplishment wasn't mine at all. It was Max's. Max taught me that the most powerful communication happens when you listen with your heart instead of your ears. He showed me that genuine connection requires patience, vulnerability, and unconditional acceptance. He proved to me that silence isn't empty, it's full of possibilities." Emma went on to study animal psychology and human-animal interaction in college. She became an advocate for children with communication challenges, co-founding an organization with Doctor that provided therapeutic animal partnerships for children facing similar struggles. Max, aging gracefully, remained her constant companion throughout these endeavors, a living testament to the transformative power of genuine connection. The secret signal remained sacred throughout Emma's life, a private language shared only between a girl and her dog, a reminder that the most meaningful conversations often happen in silence, understood through love, and celebrated by the universe in ways both visible and invisible. Emma's story inspired countless others to look beyond conventional limitations, to recognize that difference could be transformed into extraordinary strength, and to understand that authentic connection was the greatest gift one being could offer another. In the end, Emma's journey wasn't really about overcoming a speech impediment or winning a competition. It was about discovering that she possessed something far more valuable than words. She possessed the ability to love deeply, to communicate authentically, and to help others understand their own worth. And it all began with a golden retriever who looked at her with patient, knowing eyes and seemed to say, "I see you. I understand you. And you are exactly who you're meant to be. Retry can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.